I didn't realize I could turn this up. Volume. I think my voice is fading because I have a cold. Hopefully, Alex and others can hear. Muscle attachment. The endomysium, perimysium, epimysium all together come together at the end of the muscles to form a tendon bundle or a tendinous sheath. And you can see this here, where they're all coming together here and they're forming a tendon, which is the white part, or a tendon sheath, which is the surrounding part. So they attach to the bone matrix with penetrating fibers. Just have a little picture here. Let's see if I can. The fibers that attach are called Sharpie fibers. You don't really have to know that name, but I thought it was kind of interesting. The name itself describes what they do. They attach them to the bone and they're sharp, obviously, called Sharpie fibers. I'm just going to show you guys. I'll show you. See where it attaches. It's a good, strong attachment. I'll see if I can show those students that online this. Oh, get it up here and see if it works. So, you see the students at home. I'm not sure if you can see where my finger is pointing, and it is pointing to where the muscle attaches to the bone, and it has the Sharpie fibers that attach it right into the bone. And this will be important later on when we talk about injuries, when the bone is actually, fibers are pulled right out and there's a lot of injuries. Okay, nerves. Skeletal muscles are voluntary muscles, meaning you tell them what to do. They're not like your heart, which is an involuntary muscle, which is beating away all by itself, and you don't have to tell it to beat every few seconds. So they're controlled by the central nervous system. And when we get on nerves, which is, I think, next week, we'll be reviewing this again, voluntary and involuntary nerves. The blood vessels have an extensive vascular system. Muscles require a lot of oxygen to function. So, and it also helps get rid of the nutrients and supply nutrients and carry away the waste. But you'll know if you exercise, oftentimes you'll get muscle fatigue, you'll get tired. It's the oxygen, you're just not getting enough oxygen to those muscles, and they tell you by hurting. Right? They'll let you know that they're not getting. Formation of skeletal muscle fibers. Skeletal muscle cells are called fibers, which is easy. Now it just goes through the muscle fibers develop through fusion. Don't be too concerned about that. You know you have myoblasts just like you have osteoblasts and that thing. So it's sort of repeat on the myos, just different. The individual tiny cell is called a sarcomere, full of myofibrils, and we're going to go on. I think there's a better picture. So skeletal muscle fibers are very long, and they develop through the fusion of multiple myoblasts. They have hundreds of nuclei. I think in the last picture, I'll go back to it, you can see how many nuclei there are on muscle fiber. There's, looks like an earthworm. So your muscle is earthworm shaped. Okay. Sarcolemma is muscle cell membrane. It's located just below the endomysium. It surrounds sarcoplasm, which is the fluid in, which is the cell fluid or cytoplasm of the muscle fiber. The movements of substances through the sarcolemma begins contraction. So I'm going to let you guys break that one down because this one is they're getting to be more perfect. Oh, sure, go, no, take your time. It's like this. Okay, I'm going to be slower in these sections because these are the ones that are most important. You have to go to work. You're already yawning. No, I was sorry you're pushing yourself. Okay, the transverse tubules are connections with the sarcolemma, creating passageways through the muscle fiber. They extend into the sarcoplasm, which is the fluid. They're filled with extracellular fluid. And the electrical impulses conducted by the sarcolemma travel along the T tubules into the cell interior. So they allow the whole muscle to contract simultaneously altogether. And I'm going to let you guys, take time to write this down. When we start talking about how a muscle impulse is conducted, you're going to have to know this stuff. I'll scoop them briefly. Okay, Daniel? Good? Brenda? Yeah, okay, don't rush. Okay. So there's just a diagram now of the sarcolemma and the T-tubes. And you can see this here. The sarcolemma is here, sarcoplasm. My T-tubes are there. The T-tubes are here, it's yellow right here. Now all these pictures, I do believe, are in your textbook. I think they are. I've got, like I was using the other book, and it has all of them in it too. Myofibrils. So whenever you see the prefix myo, right, that means muscle. So they're made lengthwise subdivisions within the muscle fiber. They're made up of bundles of protein filaments. So they have thick and thin myofilaments. And this part, thick and thin myofilaments, that's really important. Take note of that. Because the myofilaments themselves are responsible for muscle contraction. And that's where all your chemistry comes. We get that. So peaceful when I'm not talking. Like, are you good, Brenda? Yeah. Okay. So the types of myofilaments. There's the thin filament, which is made up of an actin protein molecule. You know, I remember telling you the ones in red are the ones you're going to be concerned about, right? The thick filaments have many myosin protein molecules. So both of these proteins are essential for a muscle contraction, and we're going to be going on in a little while to see how muscles contract. I'm really being slow with this portion just because it's important to really have a good sound base in this because it affects the rest of your training. It also affects all of the lab values that you have coming back from the lab. So you'll be able to understand why they have these values. The sarcoplasmic reticulum, so a membrane structure that surrounds the myofibril, and it helps transmit action potential, the electrical impulses, into the myofibril, and it forms chambers called terminal cisterna, which are attached to the T-tubes. And these terminal cisterna are important because I don't know if you know what a cistern is. It's a storage unit, right? And then people in the prairies have cisterns underneath their houses to store water. So this is the storage unit. have the most colorful paper, which is good. Brains love color. Okay. So this has another picture of a sarcoplasmic reticulum. And you can see it. Okay, you can see it right here. And so the cisterna, remember I was taking it was a holding tank. It's like the prairies have water tanks. The cisterna is a holding tank for calcium ions. Now we're back to the chemistry here, which I was talking about. So they release calcium into the sarcomeres to begin muscle contraction. So this affects you as nurses. I mean, if a patient comes in and they don't have enough calcium, if they're low in calcium, they will be having unusual muscle contractions, right? Their heart might be racing or going too slow. So it's important. Calcium is a very important chemical in the body, the element of the body. The sarcomeres, and these ones are the ones that I always have to clean. Okay, so they're the contractile fibers of the myofibrils. The sarcomere itself is just the single contractile unit, so it's sort of the one thing at the bottom of this. And I'm just trying to think of if I have a picture of this. Actually, this little bit here is a sarcomere. I shouldn't say that, I'm sorry. But this is the myofibril, and these little bits here are the sarcomeres. They're just individual ones, and that's the individual unit. So it's kind of gone from large down to the smallest now. In unit of the muscle. Okay, we're back to the sarcomere. So this is kind of the important one where all of the chemistry happens. So you have your thick filament here, and your thin filament, which is the gray line. They have a Z track, a little line that goes through here because this is a unit, and each unit is separate, and there's a line that goes through there. And they're called bands. And when you read in your textbook or whatever, you will see them called muscle tissue with banded muscle, striated or banded muscle tissue. And you'll see that mentioned in your books. I'm just going to stop. I just want to see what's next on this. Okay. That. This is something that I would rather explain without using the PowerPoints. I'm just going to mute this for a minute. Okay. So I started drawing that earlier, but Peter said that was way too small, so I'm going to have to increase the size. This is our sarcomere. The thin run parallel to each other. This is just one, that's why I have. That's just one. I'm not sure what your photograph has in your textbook. I haven't got my textbook open. Have a look in there. And I'm not sure if it has this photograph or not, or something similar. So during a contraction, I'm just gonna go through this. So the thick and thin myofilaments that we talked about have the protein myosin and actin, which we already have reviewed. So the myosin has a molecule that looks like a little head, and I think you'll see it in your textbook. That's the myosin. And it sticks out towards the actin molecule. That would be the actin. There's a protein in between here that prevents them from touching. Protein in between that prevents them from touching when they're not active, when they're not contracting. So during a muscle contraction, these thin and thick, they're running together. Thin and thick, which are these ones, right? They actually, the protein is explain this in a sense. So the protein itself is dissolved by a chemical reaction from the stimulus. And these two meet, the actin and the myosin head, they meet. And they actually pull together, and they call it ratcheting, because the myosin will pull forward, and the actin will stay stationary, and then it will move forward again and again. So it ratchets, and I know that probably anybody who's done any car maintenance knows the ratcheting. Flicks in and locks in and keeps going. So that's what happens with these muscle stimulation. Now, when these two hook together, start the contraction, that's a cross bridge. It's one word, right? They form a cross bridge. Now, the cross bridges only form when there's calcium present. You have to have calcium before they form. And that calcium is stored in the endoplasmic reticulum that we talked about earlier. So that's how a muscle contraction occurs. And that's like the thing, calcium is so important to have that before a muscle contraction will occur. So these dead tracks that I wrote up here earlier are just that striated line that is darkened, and they do refer to them as dead tracks. And that's because this is one individual sarcomere. These, of course, are more sarcomeres on the other side. Any questions? That's okay? Okay. This is a fun part to explain. Because I didn't find that when I looked at the PowerPoint that the explanation was clear enough. Okay, we'll go back to the PowerPoint. We'll do that. Now I've handed you out the energy. I think it's energy. Okay, energy emission. Oh, so those ones are along what we're talking about right now. And it'll help you if you can review them at home when you're studying. That'll be your hand. And I'll send those to the online people tonight. I hope when I get home, I'll send you the handouts. Okay. So it talks about the muscle striations, and I've explained that already on what they are. You want to write that down? Okay? Okay, so you know, there's the review put in here as well. So skeletal muscle tissue surrounded by epithelium contains the muscle fascicules. Muscle fascicule is surrounded by perimysium, which contains the muscle fiber. Muscle fiber surrounded by endomysium contains the myofibrils. Myofibrils surrounded by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that's where the calcium is stored, consists of sarcomeres, which is the little guys we just talked about, and they're the Z lines between each one. Hello? Not direct. Oops. I think I don't direct. I don't direct. No, I didn't. Okay, we were there. Yeah. There we go. Okay, it's talking about the sarcomeres, which I just discussed with you, and the thin and thick filaments and how they ratchet across to make a contraction. Didn't do that. So muscle contraction is caused by the thin and thick filaments forming together at the same time. They need their calcium and other ions, and a specific protein required to fuel the contraction. So contraction allows for pulling inward. It never pushes out. So that's what we do. Okay. Skeletal muscle innervation, and that just means the nerve supply. It's a motor neuron. The axon, I think. You guys done neurons and axons? Yeah. We've got that. And they call it path of action potential, which just means the stimulus, right? That's all that means. The neuromuscular junction is where it's attached to the muscle fiber. And it's got a motor intake, which is how it's attached. There's a really good picture in here, I think, of it. No, it's not in that book. Probably another book I have. Innervation, so it goes along the axon to the synaptic terminal, which is right here. Looked up. And then it sends its messages that way. Okay? No. Okay. Now this one I have copied for you and handed it out. Okay? And the reason we're not going to go it's very complicated, and I think we'll just kind of talk about it in the next class. But I'll just run through it quickly first. It requires calcium. The calcium causes acetylcholine, which is ACH, to be released from the cytoplasm. The acetylcholine then stimulates sodium ions and potassium ions to come out, and then it spreads through the sarcoplasm, causing them to release the calcium from the cistern, and the calcium is used to help with the contractions of the myofibrils. It's interesting here that I noticed they have troponin here. Troponin is one of the tests that we do for just about everybody who comes into the emergency department who's complaining of chest pain, right? So it is whatever damage that has happened in the muscle tissue from having a cardiac incident will release troponin. And so that tells us if they've had a heart attack or not. Codes coming to happening. So that's what happens when you have muscular damage. They release those enzymes. So like I said, I've given you the handout, and I'll get you to go through that, and then we can talk about that next time. So the sarcomeres shorten to reduce tension. Contraction duration depends on how much stimuli there are. If you're running and you need a lot of stimuli to get those muscles to work quickly and work strongly, then you'll have more neural stimulation. And depends on the number of calcium ions again. Calcium is so important. And also the availability of an energy source. Now ATP is the adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy source. And we'll go on with that. So the relaxation, after you have used your muscles and they go back to relax, the calcium returns back into the cistern, right? It just goes back in again. The actin and the myosin, that little ratchet system that I was talking about, they just detach from each other, and the cross bridges are broken. They're no longer attached. And the sarcomeres will remain contracted until they're pulled back into resting position. And that's what they mean by, if you have pulled up your muscle, your bicep, you still have to pull it back down. So they'll remain contracted until it's pulled back. Good. So there is a site for you if you want to look at this. I'm not sure if you have it in your room or whatever. I haven't looked at it myself. Have you guys looked at your CD that comes with your? No, I haven't. Okay. I have others that I've looked at. No, no. Okay. I can always get this. Tension production. When they say all or one principle, they mean either it's contracted or relaxed. There's not much in between. It's either tight or it's loose. There's nothing else. It doesn't go like halfway and stop. Okay. Muscle tone. It says that skeletal muscles have always some motor neurons that are action, and it's just to maintain muscle tone, which when you're standing, you're not moving, but you're still standing erect. You're not falling over, hopefully. And so it maintains that body muscle tone to keep our standing up straight, or even standing like that. It just keeps you upright. When you do babies and you do APGAR scores when you're born, one of the APGAR scoring methods is muscle tone. If a baby is just laying there flaccid, they don't get very many points. If they're active and they're moving around, they'll get more points awarded for having good muscle tone. You're good? Okay. Okay, the types of muscle tension are isotonic contraction and isometric. You probably recognize isometric from isometric. Both exercises? Isometric exercises. So isotonic, shortens or lengthens, resulting in motion. So if the muscle shortens, like my bicep here, if it shortens, it's a concentric contraction, and if it lengthens, it's an eccentric. So isometric ones, the muscle develops tension that is equal to resistance. When you do isometric exercises, it is like pushing like this. You're not moving, but you are pushing in. So it actually maintains, the length of my arms or the length of my contraction is not changing, but it is, the muscles are still tense and they're still working. Yeah, it would be the same thing. You're not moving anywhere, but you have toned your muscles are in contraction. Isometric exercises were a big thing a few years ago. So you wouldn't have to have any equipment. You would just, press against your own body, press against the wall, whatever. Energy. Ooh. That's the one I handed out to you too, I think, didn't I? You got that one? The energy one? ATP, the adenosine triphosphate. There has to be available to start the contraction, right? I should get mine out because mine's all highlighted already. Yeah. Now, when you see on this energy, like I said, I will send it to the people online. When you see and it's got, 2,500 molecules, please don't worry about those numbers. That's not something you have to memorize. But you do have to know that ATP is used to start a contraction. And it has to be there if the muscle is going to work. If it's not there, the muscle is just not going to work. The other one you're more concerned about is the glycogen. Because if there's not enough ATP to keep the muscle going, the body will revert to using glycogen in the form of glucose. And what happens with that is that once you burn a lot of glucose, you start to create lactic acid. And I think at the bottom of your handout, you haven't got this part. The glucose molecule is used to generate more ATP. Now I have like muscle energy, like a little, it's more of a little diagram that goes ATP, and it just goes in a circle, right? They just keep creating each other over and over again, as long as you have enough available for muscle contraction. So you have that, and you can review that at home and think that'll help you.
What is it in creatine that gets your body?
The creatine, it's actually part of the formula with the ATP. Creatine creates the ADP, and with these, the creatine phosphate, it moves into phosphatase. Hey, you don't have to know all these, and it's part of the cycle. So if you are missing creatine, then your muscles wouldn't be able to contract as well or properly because you're missing part of that cycle. And it's this cycle that makes the muscles contract. Right? You have to have all these in place before the muscle contracts. You're not required at this level to learn all these chemicals. Your most important chemicals are your calcium, potassium, and the ATP. That's really all you have to be worried about. Because that's getting into doctors. Okay. Creatine phosphokinase is something else that we often look for when we do blood work. That's the CPK. It's right down here. And it says right here, muscle cells that are damaged will have a high CPK. We'll look for that for heart muscle damage as well. So when I get my lab values back, I'll be looking for the CPK. See if that person really did have a heart attack. Okay? Good. So at peak of exertions, energy use and muscle activity. So muscles lack oxygen to support production of ATP at peak exertion. I think we're missing something. Hang on. No, I guess that's it. So then we talk about the muscle cells stimulate glycolysis, and all that means is glucose or glycogen, and lysis means breakdown, right? Those two together. So it breaks into glucose to fuel the ATP production. So the byproduct of glycolysis is uric acid, and this is how you end up with lactic acid gains in your muscle when you've been exercising too much, right? That's what happened. Okay. Muscle fatigue. So your muscles actually you've overworked them, so that they're now at a point of being fatigued. And what happens with them in their fatigue is a depletion of the metabolic reserves, and your metabolic reserves are your calcium and your ATP, all those different things, all those different chemicals. Damages to the muscle tissue itself. You may have torn a muscle or injured it in some way. That causes muscle fatigue. And then again, the increased level of lactic acid because there wasn't enough glucose to keep you going. And they start making lactic acid.
When you're working out, why do you think they tell you to keep pushing it past, like, your muscle gets
Yeah,
to the
work till
core?
it hurts or whatever. You're not supposed to. I learned that at the physiotherapist in Kelowna, because when I injured my shoulder, as soon as it started hurting, or as soon as any muscle started hurting, they said, that's it, enough. You've actually worn your muscle out and you tired it out, and you should not push through it, and you shouldn't do that, because all you're doing now is damaging the muscle. So as much as they say, work for the burn and all that other stuff, it really does do some muscle damage. You shouldn't really do it.
That's when you don't get the most.
Well, no, not really. I mean, repetition exercise, like if you're doing 10 reps one day of a certain exercise, and then that's fine, and you're not getting the muscle, then you move up to say 15, because your muscles will develop and enlarge. So they will eventually do that, but you're not pushing through that pain, where pain means something's wrong. And that's what pain is to our body, right? It's telling us something's gone wrong. And that's the only way that our body has, communicating with our brain, say that's not right. So pushing through the pain of exercise, you're probably doing some damage. So you can tell your coach that or whatever. Say, you're a nurse instructor's ad. I'm not doing that. So normal muscle function, of course, requires intracellular energy reserves, which you have enough reserves there, circulatory and nerve supply, oxygen, and pH, this is your normal body pH, which is 7.25 and 7.45. Do you have to know that? You won't have to know that for this course, but you may have to know it further on in another course. Okay? So it's all the same stuff that we learned before about a cell. A cell needs oxygen, it needs nutrition, and it needs water. So it's sort of the same thing. Last one. A ton more. Okay, now we're talking about people who overtrain, right? So hypertrophy. So as soon as you get the word hyper in front of anything, so it means larger than, or bigger than, or faster than. So it's hypertrophy of the muscle. So the muscle fibers themselves, they increase in diameter and they increase in number of myofibrils. And it increases the glycogen reserves. So as you exercise, like you were talking, it increases your reserves. So the next time you exercise, you should be able to exercise a little bit more. So that's why we're not fighting through the pain to get there, because you eventually will get there. Just keep repeating. So the word that you have to be just concerned about is hypertrophy. What does that mean? Good? Yeah. Okay. Atrophy, and we see a lot of people who are paraplegics, who have the muscle tone in their body has completely gone, and that limbs that don't have any more nerve innervation. They've lost the nerve stimulus to those muscles to make them function. So the muscles just atrophy. They just get smaller and weaker, and the damage, in the case of this fellow who's in the wheelchair, the damage would be permanent. And he probably has had a lower spinal cord injury, and that's why he doesn't have the nerve stimulation to his muscles to get them to work properly. Yes, it is. It's your cousin. Yeah, he's a pretty neat guy. Like I say, then the damage can be permanent. We get muscle atrophy with elders too, right? They're laying in bed or they're not walking and exercising. They will get muscle atrophy. So cardiac muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue is different from our regular skeletal muscle tissue because instead of laying in nice little tubes, the nice little tubes that we were talking about, the skeletal muscle tissue. Now we have cardiac muscle tissue. So this is skeletal. This is cardiac. Okay. The cardiac muscle tissue actually has branches. Dead. So it has little branches that go out and hooks up with other muscle tissues. They kind of branch out together. So the benefit of this branching is the fact that they interconnect. So they're a lot stronger and they work as a unit. So instead of my bicep pulling up and that's all it's doing, the cardiac muscle, the whole muscle, contracts at one time and releases, and it works together. It works as one mass rather than just a single muscle tissue. So that is the advantage to having interconnect. Okay. Brenda, are you good? Yeah. Okay. Drawing pictures? Well, that's good because visual is important, right? You can look at that and you can tell me everything I just told you by looking at one. Okay, my love picture. Very gentle. I'm getting frustrated. I don't know why I'm doing this. There. Stop jumping around. So the 4 functional characteristics of cardiac muscle tissue is automaticity, meaning it's automatic, right? You're not thinking about making your heart beat right now. You're not beat. So it beats on its own. And then when they say it's contraction without neural stimulation, it means it's not the same type of supply as the skeletal muscle. It's controlled by a pacemaker. And you've heard all about pacemakers that people have implanted in because their hearts aren't pumping properly. So the pacemaker of the heart is space writing. I like heart. It's an interesting one. So our heart. 4 beautiful chambers. We actually have a pacemaker node that's in here in the atrium, the upper part of the heart. We have another one that's right in there. Your initial impulse is sent out from the atrium, goes down here. That's the atrial node, and goes down the central one. And then the impulse comes down like that, and it contracts the heart and pushes the pumps of blood. But these are little nodes of nerve tissue that make that whole muscle contract and respond to the muscle. So instead of like having one nerve going in, we've got this little bundle of nerve tissue that's doing it. And they call it a node. So that's when we talk about pacemaker, it is a pacemaker that we're talking about. Okay. Good with that. I think this worked properly. This information like 10 times longer and all that, you don't have to know. It's just to tell you that the cardiac muscle takes longer to contract and therefore it doesn't fatigue as fast. I mean, let's face it, the only muscle in your whole body that's working all the time. It never rests. So that's why the contractions are slower and it doesn't fatigue as fast. Tetanic, when they say tetanic, that means a muscle, like a muscle cramp. Right? They are membranes in the heart to prevent it from cramping, because if your heart cramped, then you would die. So that's another good part about the heart tissue is it has cell membrane tetanic contractions. Maybe titanic contractions, that's pretty bad. Okay. Now we have the smooth muscle, that's another muscle in the body. And those are the ones that surround blood vessels. So it affects your cardiac system, your cardiovascular system, and it regulates and helps regulate blood pressure. They also are present in glandular systems or reproductive systems. And they assist moving substances through the system. I'm trying to think of a glandular system that would be affected. I went through in my mind all the different glands, thinking which one would be most appropriate. So reproductive for sure in the fallopian tubes, where there are contractions in the fallopian tubes. When the egg moves down, that type of thing. So that's an example of smooth muscle tissue in reproductive and glandular systems. Other places you have smooth muscle tissue is the digestive and urinary systems. Your digestive tract, when you swallow, you have peristalsis, right, that brings the food down to your stomach. And of course you have peristalsis that goes into the small intestine and large intestine to help move that food along there. The urinary, of course, your bladder would has a muscle, smooth muscle that decompresses when you go to the washroom and you urinate. The bladder decompresses and runs the urine. So that is another muscle. It forms sphincters that contract and expand. Of course, your rectal area, there's a sphincter that contracts and expands when you have a bowel movement. The integumentary, you remember this, erector pili, the ones that make your hair stand up on end if you're cold and you have goosebumps or you're frightened. So those are all smooth muscles. Okay. So now we've gone through that chapter, so I think maybe we'll take a break because the muscle system is next, chapter 10. So we'll have a break for a while. I have a 20-minute break till 4 o'clock. Sure. Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, sure. If you want. The muscular system. You could hopefully. Blue Jeans is not working. We're having an awful time with it. Peter's, well, Clint, yeah, Clint and Garth and Peter, the fellow that does my tech stuff, they've all been working trying to get it to operate, and it's not doing well at all. So I was a little bit worried about today if the students could even get on, so I'm glad that Alex is on. So what they're going to do, they're going to tape this session, and then they're going to download it into YouTube. So if you wanted to view the next part, the muscle, you could view it on YouTube. And we'll have to send out some information to everybody so that they know. I I think the other students that are online, we've always sent them how to get it, because that's the only way. What's happening is we have to delete these videos every week and then put on a new video on top of that. And so they're not being able to view them, and so we're running into some problems with that. So hopefully the YouTube one will work better than the Blue Jeans one. Okay, well, enjoy your shift at work. So we'll take a break till 4. Yeah, hopefully have a good shift. Good to see you.
Yeah. I'm just dreading who I was texting.
Yes, it is. Oh,
Yeah.
it's hard to come on a Saturday, and your whole week you're busy, and then I have to go on Saturday as well.
I'm very excited.
I don't know if the other students that are online are doing the same thing, and that's why they have to attend the Saturday class. I'm not sure if that. I'll have to ask Marty. She would know. I was curious to know if they were in the nursing program or were doing this for some other program. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it's a long week.
I think this is my class and I'm excited to be because it's fun, right? Like,
Oh, good.
Like, I think it's fun. It's something that I was saying, it's like, and it makes it less hard to learn this Saturday.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah. It's hard, and it is when you have to give students this much information. It's hard to make it fun because you can't take the time to make it fun. But yeah, I find it a little frustrating because I have lots of ideas that I would like to do, but then the time constraint of I have to get this much information into 5 hours, right? That's too bad. We can't do this or we can't do that. So I'm really hoping that when we get to the heart and kidneys and stuff, that I can bring in a heart and we can dissect it. I know. I have to find a butcher to get a heart because you can't really buy them in regular like grocery stores or like whatever Safety Mart or something. So I'd have to go to a butcher to get a heart. It'd be interesting. Yeah, do you?
Yeah, she said she wanted classes. She's from Westford, but she
Right.
butchering.
Uh-huh.
She goes like has her own house and everything.
Right. Yeah.
And then I asked her, she's saying
Right.
that if she doesn't use it, she has some money.
Because not a lot of hearts. Some people do eat them, but not often. I think they're pretty well. They don't. But a cow heart's the same virtually as a human heart. It's a 4-chambered heart. So that's what I would be getting anyway. If I can get a cow heart. And the kidneys and liver. Well, liver is easy to get because it's sold on the market, right?
Yeah.
So that's easy to get. Kidneys, you do find them occasionally in the grocery store, but I don't know if I will be able to. But yeah, I've got to get a butcher. I'm going to look around the Okanagan and see if I can find a butcher. Or like somebody, like you say, someone who has their own cattle who is doing their own butchery.
Right on your way in from Spring.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would have to pick it up fresh. Or I can't really freeze. Well, I could freeze it in the box. Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's a problem. I talked to Marty about it, and she said it wouldn't be a problem as long as you guys are wearing gloves, because if you get from a butcher, then you know it doesn't have any infections.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If it's wild meat, then it's a bit of a problem, because they test the butchered ones for TB and all the other things. So that wouldn't be a problem, but we'd just wear gloves. But I don't know how in the world I can just take the camera and just kind of focus it.
I think you could just focus it right on it while we're
with the other students, because it's just, when you see it, it just means so much more than just talking about it.
Yeah, for
me, it's
Yeah.
like visually seeing it.
Yeah.
Like doing all this is fine, but I find
Right, I
that
know.
once I've gotten out there, then I'm like, I underestimate my skill, but once I get done, it's like I just,
Oh, good, yeah.
like I don't know what, I was like, even when I first went out on my own for the home care.
Oh, yes,
and I
yeah.
was like, oh my God, you know, like all that stuff is in the books, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna do okay.
I can remember it
Yeah,
all.
like I didn't know, but once I was out there, it was fine. Like,
And it works really well, like if you take the information that you learn here or in your other classes, and then you go to work, are you still working while you're in school? I don't know how she's doing it, but anyway. No, I don't either. Youngin doesn't have any kids. That's what it is.
Yeah, because I have a kid that's like, I have to go home. It's
Yeah.
my mom.
Yeah, right. You have responsibilities outside of this.
My kid is 14, so it's not so bad.
Mm-hmm. But
How
still have
she
to
does
be
it,
there.
I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't wrap my head around going to school and working.
And the nice part about these courses, because you have your clinical in between, like you have classes and you have clinical,
Yeah.
that you can take the information that you learned in class and you go out and you see it, and it really means a lot more.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's just
huge.
so much easier to remember something when you see, Mr. Jones who's broken his hip, and then it all comes back to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's much.
Well, it's just like when I was in Illinois working, and this guy said that he had hit his shin on his car.
Right. Yeah.
He hit it, and then all of a sudden it was open wound.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started growing and growing and became an infection.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
doctor, it was scabbing, and then the doctor
Mhm.
pulled the scab off, and then it just turned into like, it just never ever healed.
Never
It
healed,
got
yeah.
really bad.
Uh-huh.
It was like, when he passed away, it was that, like, his legs were still leaking, and, we had tried like all kinds of things, and
Mhm.
nutrition, and it,
Yeah.
we tried airing it out, but even when we were airing it out,
Right.
because his place wasn't so clean, it was getting
Mhm.
bacteria.
Bacteria
it was
in
just
there.
growing.
Yeah. Oh.
He almost lost his life and everything, and then
Yeah.
the day before he passed away, I had to give him a shower, and it was like the pain he was going through. I was washing his legs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I felt so bad for him. I was like, oh my God, this was like, that hurts, that's enough. Like, to me, when
Yeah.
somebody says that's enough, then you stop.
Yeah, and that's enough. Yeah.
Because the nurses were like, no, you need to get more off. I'm like, he's had enough pain.
Yeah.
He is done. Like, he can't handle like the water.
And the nice part about the fact that you're going further in your career, now that you've gone from an HCA into the LPN program, is now you learn how to handle medications so that you can give them something for pain before you wash them and that type of thing. So it's great that you're kind of going along and kind of learning a lot more and being able to help people a lot more because of what you learned. So that's awesome.
And that was the thing when we were at Illinois, because there's only like a couple of nurses on.
Yeah.
It's like you're delegated so many tasks. And, like even when I went in for giving my first nitrogen, I was like, oh, because I never had training with it just because they didn't have enough time. It was not enough time. It was like getting there, I'm like, oh my God. But it was that's when I depended on the client too. I was like, oh, okay.
This is how I do it.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, thank God for like that. You know,
right.
I don't need to do the wrong medications or, any of this stuff.
Yeah, and they're pushing people to do more and more when they haven't been trained, because when I was teaching the PhD program in Kamloops, one of the students there had been giving insulin, and she really didn't know anything about it, but she was told she had to do it, so she went, like, not as a student, but as an HCA home care worker. Yeah. For the company she was working for, she was told she could give this, right? And not really, legally she wasn't covered. Then you run into the problems of legalities. If you get sued, who's responsible? Is it you that's responsible for doing something that you weren't trained for? Or is it the people that hire you and not training you? So there's a lot of legalities with giving medications. So you have to be really careful.
It was the same thing when I went in for like oxygen tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had never worked one in my life or never seen one, and even reading it, I didn't understand the steps to it, right?
Yeah.
And then when the nurse came in and she's like, in the way she showed it was like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And it was so easy, Right. Because I stood there for like 20 minutes trying to figure this out, and then the client's like, oh man, like, don't you know, like I don't know how to do this, I'm sorry. Like,
well, the truth is you're safer not to do it if you don't know how to do it, because you could cause problems. Oxygen tanks, there's risks with them.
Oh, there is.
I mean, you can turn them the wrong way and then they exhaust the oxygen and then it kind of flies around and people can get injured. So there's issues with that, even if you're not trained how to do it.
But even when we spoke to our boss, he was just like, it's basic, you should know how to do that. Like, you know what, we don't, but like, not all of us know how to do that, have been trained for that. He's like, it's basic, how do you not know how to do that?
Well, when you get that kind of response, then it's their responsibility to train. If you're honest and willing to go to your employer and say, I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing to learn, then they are responsible.
He wasn't very nice about it.
I was going to say
that far by more than one of us because like we go to this facility, they don't know how to work the machine, or if you're coming in, you know, the client would be like, oh, these new nurses are coming in and they don't know how to work my machine, and
Right.
And he goes, there's a book right there, but sometimes people don't learn by looking at the book. They need to be shown exactly step by step.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah, and it's just really frustrating, but as an employer, if he's not given you the training when you requested it, the legality falls on him because you requested it and he didn't do it. So therefore, there's problems there. They should train it properly. And if it takes visually doing it, well, then that's the way it should be. If you don't understand all the written stuff, then it's his responsibility to make sure you know how to do it safely.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very hard.
I was like, okay, and I was wondering, like, I didn't know when it was fully, like, you could record fully back because it was popping off.
Yeah.
Push it in, it'll pop.
Yeah.
And then they read the book and it says if it's at a certain pressure.
What?
Like, it doesn't just,
Okay. Yeah, exactly. But still, you had to do that yourself. But yeah, it's really, there's a lot of legalities in nursing or any medical.
And then with the home care, you're like on your own a lot. You have to use your critical thinking a lot more.
And you don't have any help to lift people. And that's a big thing with home care, that they don't have help to lift and they often get injured. Because they're trying to do more than they should be or more than they're capable of doing.
Well,
So it's kind of sad.
Like when I was like 300 plus pounds.
Yeah.
She couldn't get out of bed and her, you know, and it had to change her. And it was like, even her, for my safety and her safety, was getting her to roll on her side. But even then, you roll her on her side, she was on oxygen. It was like she was out of breath even before she could get him.
Right.
And, you know, I tried to help her and her husband would come in and it was hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard. It was like trying to help her and then she was getting upset because you're taking too long while I'm trying to get
Right. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, and you know, me being like so tiny, I'm like, I'm trying, I really am trying.
I know.
You know, and that's because it's not enough work, which is sad.
Which is sad, yeah, it is, because then it doesn't work well, because then if their worker gets injured, then they're paying compensation for that person. So really, in the long run, they're not saving a lot of money. When they get a person who's injured, then they have to pay for that person's recovery, and they have to pay for someone to replace her, so they're paying two wages now. So really, it makes more sense to put two people into a situation like that to prevent an injury, to prevent that. But a lot of employers don't see the big picture. They see the little picture that's happening today and how much I'm spending today for this person, but they're not looking at a year from now, how much money have I spent? Because now I've got someone on compensation and I have to hire another person. Yeah, they don't look at the long term.
No, and it's crazy because you can get one person who's like 300 plus pounds, and then you get one lady who's like maybe 89 pounds.
Yeah.
You have two people there. And for the other one, you have like one person.
Yeah, and it doesn't,
Like, no,
it's not logical.
Really? You know,
You
I
must
could
be
see
kidding,
somebody
yeah.
going with an 89 pound person doing themselves if they had to, but the 300 plus pounds, it's like, how am I supposed to get her on her side? You know, even pulling the slider, she is supposed to help you, but you're still, like, how much weight you're still taking on.
Right.
Right.
And that's how
That's
how shoulders get in
But I
there.
found when I was doing it, my muscles were getting bigger. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm growing muscles like that.
That's good, you're growing the muscles and everything.
Yeah,
Because nursing, that's even, I found after my shoulder injuries, that even like helping the students I would support the patient when they were doing something, washing their back or doing whatever, dressings on their back, and I would be having hand on shoulder, hand on hip, and pulling like this. I noticed in my shoulders right away. So yeah, nursing is bad for injuries, but high incidence of injury. I'm just gonna run to the washroom. It's too late.
What's your future plan?
I'm working slowly for your bachelor's.
Really? That's so awesome. You plan on taking it all here, or are you gonna move?
Moving. But I like here. I like
You like it? Nice. You know, I spent all those years in my life trying to get to live here. And then I realized at the end of it all, I just wanted to be here. Because this is where my family is. I know everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I go to school, I know the people in school, and they're there for support. They come by 100%. They have the elders. And I find that they take care of me very well. And when I went to TRU and I went to other universities, it was like you're totally on your own. You have no support system. Like you go there, you listen to lectures, you do your lectures, and do all that stuff by yourself. So I just felt like when I got here, I was so used to support. I was like, oh my God, there's nobody there talking to me. Because the staff, they don't really care. They're just there to do their job. And you know, if you have questions, go look up online. So I don't have time for you. And I found that part to be so cool. I don't have time for you. If you don't understand it, then you're on your own. That's not my problem. I'm only here for a lecture and wasn't a lecture. Yeah. And that was the hardest part for us, you know, going from here to there. I'm so closed off. I was like, what?
I know. I didn't like it there either.
I hated it there. Like, it was so awful. Like, I didn't feel like I mattered.
Oh, yeah.
Or even my education mattered. You know, like we're paying out so much money, but it doesn't feel like you matter. It's just like you're just another person there.
Just a number.
Yeah. But that's sad.
Yeah, I really like it. Never like it here too.
So that's good.
Yeah.
Comfortable is pretty much better than being in the interview. And swimming and all these stuff. I hope we get our theater though.
I know, right?
Just with the skeleton. Did you bring the skeleton?
I got it. What? I have bones in today. I forgot what was that. No, I didn't find anything like that. Like I didn't even want to walk them to try to make up there anywhere. No, I didn't even see anybody. I don't know, I think it's really cute. They're in the border now, but they're cute.
What do you color?
Or anybody else. Yeah. This is what I got when I was in school. So do you have a boy or a girl? Boy.
A girl.
A girl. Yeah. Okay, that's your girl?
It is.
It is?
Yeah.
I didn't know. Oh, oh, cool. That's excellent.
Yeah, when I found out, I was like, I hope you want one of each.
Yeah, right.
Of course. Yeah.
So just for the fun of it. See the names on there. For that.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Play. And Danielle will tell her what we did when we got back. A few more minutes, a couple
my daughter laughed at me when I was like,
Looking at the skeleton.
First of all, she's like, I'm so awesome.
But then you should say, this is the appendicular skeleton. This is the exoskeleton. You can tell her all about it and explain it. And then she'll say, okay, that's why you have a skeleton.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Mom, why you came home with a skeleton.
Yeah.
Well, they're good kind of for placement as well, because when you start talking about the heart, lungs, and kidneys, we can put them kind of on there or inside there just to make sure you get the idea where they live. Because I was really, really surprised. My class in Penticton, and we were talking about injuries, and I said something about the spleen, and there was kind of a blank look around the room. I'm going like, you guys know where the spleen is? And nobody did know. So it's funny, people do, they're learning so much that they just miss things every once in a while. So that's what I'm thinking. It would be nice to go back and kind of name things and put them in the right place. So the worst part's over. The chemical stuff and is, I think, the most difficult part of the course. So now we're just more on to the visual kind of muscles. So I guess we're good at 4. So that's chapter 10, I think, in your books, is the muscular system. And the muscular system consists only of the skeletal muscles, which is unusual, but only of the skeletal muscles. Not the smooth or the cardiac, because they have different actions. Muscular organization affects the power, range, and speed of muscle movement. Okay. Tell me when you're ready. We're taking skeletons. Okay. So the fascicles are, we've seen this before, the muscle cells are organized into bundles called fascicles. We just did that in the previous one. An orientation of skeletal muscle fibers. There are 4 patterns of fascicles, and they're organized into parallel, convergent, pinnate, and circular. So they have the parallel ones, which are your biceps here. And the convergent, which are more like a triangle across here. The pinnate is C. They're also, it's a different shape, and the circular, of course, is circular, which is like a larger mouth. So that's the patterns that they're organized into. The parallel muscles, like I was saying, are, well, the calf muscle here is the parallel muscle. It's really thick in the middle and then thins out towards the end. The biceps muscle is a good example. And they're the most abundant type of muscle in the body, are the parallel muscles. They're captured each end with a tendon into the muscle, into the bone, I should say. And the center of body of the muscle thickens and the muscle contracts. So when you lift your arm up, your bicep thickens. Convergent muscles. You can see where the base of the muscle is very wide, and it's like a fan that looks like a fish shell, actually. and that's your pecs, right? Your pectoralis muscle. Pectoralis muscle is one of the ones you have to know the name of and where it is. Remember I said they were fan or seashell shaped, clamshell shaped. They cover a large area because the pec muscle covers this whole area here. On tipper. Yeah. And that would be attached to along the manubrium here and then attached by a tendon on the other side. That's where you get that fan shape. Aiming pennate muscles, or I don't know if you eat penne, which is Italian for feather. So they're like a feather. So that's the penne there, and penne like feather, and has like feathering. So they're very strong muscles. They contain more myofibrils than a parallel muscle does, and they develop more tension than a parallel muscle does. So they're a strong muscle. And you can see where they're located. What's up in here, where the quads are, where these big, healthy, strong muscles are right here. So they are large and very strong muscles. Circular muscles, we have one around our mouth. This is their example that they've given me. And I know that they show pictures. Excuse me. Cough is coming. Sorry. They're called sphincters, which is circular, of course. And they open and close the entrances to the body, which will be around your mouth and your rectal area. And also the pictures that I have in here. Whoops, I messed that up. It looks around your eye orbit as well as that circular muscle around the mouth and eye orbit. See that? Yes. As well. Pardon me? No, I have that cold, and I think it's just starting to get to me. I was surprised it lasted this long. I thought I'd lose my voice tonight this year. Origins and insertions. Skeletal muscles have one end that does not move during contraction, and it's called the origin. The other end of the structure is the insertion end. So a good example of this would be if I was to move my arm upwards, my origin is the humerus up here. It's stationary, it's not moving. And the insertion is the one that's lifting it up down here by the radius. So it's a result of flexion, extension, or abduction. Oh dear. Too far. So muscle interactions, they work as groups. The smaller muscles within the group reach the maximum tension first, followed by the larger primary muscles. Trying to think of an example of that. Because when you're lifting something, it isn't just the biceps, it's all the accessory muscles that are around it as well that are helping you lift. But they say the smaller muscles within the group would be the tightest first, and then the larger muscle would tighten. Axial and appendicular muscles are next. And the division of the musculars were axial, position of the head and spinal column. But they don't play a role in movement other than moving the rib cage. So they're not, the axial muscles aren't really moving things a lot in the axial skeleton. But the appendicular muscles support the pelvic girdle and move the appendicular skeleton. So that's what they do. The girdles, pectoral and pelvic girdles are supported, and they help move the limbs. Okay. The effects of aging, we've talked quite a bit about that today. So the muscle fibers become smaller in diameter, so of course then they become weaker. There's less elasticity to it. There is more fibrous tissue than there is muscle tissue. Therefore, they become weaker again. There's two reasons they become weak, and they're not as resilient either. They don't, if they exercise, elder people exercise, they don't return to normal as fast as a young person. So decreased tolerance for exercise and decreased ability to recover from injuries as well. So aging isn't really a lot of fun. The cardiovascular system and the skeletal muscle system. The heart derives oxygen and nutrients, delivers oxygen and nutrients to the muscle, and it removes waste of carbon dioxide and lactic acid. And that's how they're working together, because the heart is helping the skeletal muscles get rid of waste and delivering oxygen. The skeletal muscles in turn contract to return the blood to the heart and provides protection against the vessel injury. So the heart's providing the nutrients and everything for the other muscles, and the muscles in turn are protecting the heart and providing return of the blood. Respiratory system and how it works with a skeletal muscle system. Again, the lungs are providing the oxygen and they're eliminating carbon dioxide. And in turn, the muscles, the skeletal muscles are generating carbon dioxide. They're controlling the entrance ways to the respiratory system and assisting with respiration. Whenever you breathe in and out, your muscles are helping assist. And they help us talk as well. So the laryngeal muscles, your voice muscles, help with that. So they are all working together. The integumentary system and the skeletal system. The skin, again, we've had the integumentary system, which is just a nice review. It removes excess body heat from the muscles and synthesizes vitamin D for calcium and phosphate absorption and provides protection for the muscle. And the muscles in return pull on the skin of the face to produce facial expressions. So it helps us smile. Right? I guess that's a nice thing to do. The nervous system and the skeletal muscle system working together. Of course, the nerves help control the muscle contractions. They help the respiratory and cardiovascular systems during activity. They speed them up, of course, to provide more oxygen. And the muscles, of course, monitor our position, our facial expression, and our speech. And that's what the muscles are giving back to them. The endocrine system, it adjusts hormones for growth and metabolism, and it regulates calcium and phosphate ions for contraction. It regulates the hormone release for glycogen and fats from storage when the muscles are active and they're using. They need that energy. And the muscles in return, skeletal muscles in return, provide protection for the endocrine gland. This is actually a really nice review. Ta-da! In the session. So we have one other thing that a couple other things I want to do in this class before we go, because I had an opportunity to read through the exams, and I've noticed there are a couple of things in there that aren't covered in your textbook, and they were not covered on the PowerPoint. So I just want to run through a couple of things. I'm going to try to see if I can get one of these videos back. So I'll just leave it be. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to hear about compartment syndrome. No? Okay. Compartment syndrome is something that you'll see we're talking about the muscles and how they're structured. You can see that each muscle group has coatings around it to keep it as a group. Your tendons also have a coating around. So the muscle itself has a lot of different didn't like to go into the other. It has a lot of different compartments. Sorry. These compartments are usually surrounded by fascia. Surrounded by fascia. And it forms kind of a tight band. So if that is injured at any time, if you're out riding a bike, doing something physical, and you hit this muscle area very hard, and you do damage, then the muscle area may start to swell and bleed. Because there's lots of vascularity coming into these muscles. There's lots of bleeding that can occur. You may have a pool of blood here and swelling of tissue fluid inside of that closed compartment, and that's where they get compartment syndrome. Compartment syndrome is really quite dangerous when you have somebody who has had a fracture and the bone is fractured. there's a lot of blood that is coming out of here and pooling in the fracture site. And these muscles that are overlying this broken bone, the blood is in these, in the muscular compartments in between the fascia and the muscle tissue. It can put a lot of pressure onto the muscles and the surrounding nerves as it swells. So here we come along in all of our wisdom, and the doctor comes along, and the person has a broken bone, and what does he do? Puts a cast on it, right? So he casts this area. So there's your cast on the outside. So what happens here? You see that this is swelling. That's right. So push us up against the cast, and now this compartment that's full of blood and fluid and is under a lot of pressure, and it pushes into the muscle tissue and all the other tissues, the skin and everything, but in the muscle tissue mostly, in these compartments, and it kills it, right? So you have a lot of muscle tissue damage. So you can actually, if you're not very careful in your nursing, and you're not watching what's happening down here at this fellow's, this is an arm that's cast. We'll say this is his arm. You cast it. So you've got all your fingers down here. If you're not cautious and watching the circulation, monitoring the circulation, so you're monitoring the color. They're monitoring color, and I'll write color or sensation and movement. And movement. So we C W S M, and I'll be saying that a lot. You'll hear that in your nursing classes. So the circulation has been compressed because this compartment has swollen and it's put pressure on the tissue against the cast. And this can happen even if you put a tensor bandage on too tightly. You can have compartment syndrome. Any pressure that's keeping that compartment pushed in. So you'll be checking for papillary refill, the warmth of the color of the limb. You want it to be nice, you want it to be pink, you want it to be warm. You want them to have normal sensation. You don't want numbness or tingling, and you want them to be able to move their digits. If it's on their feet, you want them to have a whole legal pose, right? So as a nurse, that's a big responsibility, because people can actually lose limbs with this. Because the tissue dies because it's so tightly compressed, and they can lose their limbs. So that's an important thing to know. So that's what they call compartments. When those compartments get full and swollen, cause pressure on the rest of the surrounding tissue. Now you can probably go online and get more information about this if you wanted to. That should exist, because like I said, I did not find it in your book. So compartment syndrome, I'll just write this down for you. Compartments. blood. Lower body fluids. We have torn ligaments in there. Pulled tendons as well. Torn muscles. And this can all happen within this compartment. So any of these four things can happen in that muscular compartment. So any of these could cause a compartment syndrome. Okay, is there any questions at all about the things we learned today? Oh, over a break. A bit early. I thought it would go a lot longer. I planned the class for a lot longer, but that's okay. I think we're good. So I think we're good. We'll have a rest and enjoy the rest of the day.
Yay. So your rest will be going home, or are you guys staying overnight?
Oh no, we just get home. We just go home. It's actually not that far. It takes an hour and a half. Yeah, it's better. So we allow 2 hours, and that's not bad.
You don't see a lot of deer usually?
No, not in the connector. We don't see a lot. You know where I see a lot of deer is between here and
Yeah.
this time of night.
I mean, they're nice to see, but they're not nice when you're on the road.
I was going to say, you don't want to, yeah, you don't want to bump into.
I used to see a lot when I was going back and forth from Delaware to here. Especially if I left at night, it would be logs on the road.
Oh, yeah.
They're just terrible. It's like, every 5 minutes, it's like beep, beep, and you know.
And I do have deer with us, but
Yeah, me too.
I don't know how.
Sometimes they don't seem effective enough, or they're just here at the last minute, and then they're jumping off the road.
Well, it's interesting because I see them with the deer whistles I had on, like, they go along the original one. They would stop and they would turn their ears towards you, so they obviously heard something.
Yeah.
Usually they'd run the other way rather than running over the
Some of them
shoulder.
the top ones seem to be more curious, because they're
Yeah.
not sure, so they're like,
Yeah, and then they go toward, it's funny, they go towards the car rather
Yeah.
than running away from it.
like I had one hit my car, it was like, oh, there was no damage, but it hit the back end of my car, and I thought, oh my god, I mean, oh, I went to look it was nothing, like it was just touched it, but it felt like enough to scare the crap.
Yeah, I was just gonna try to